and thank you for joining us today for the DTN Downstream Energy Forum. We have an impressive roster of panelists participating in today's event, and our very own Heather Killow, Senior Vice President and Energy Principal here at DTN, is the moderator. But before we go into formal introductions and questions, I just want to get a few housekeeping items out of the way. You'll notice that everyone is currently muted. If you would like to ask a question, please type it into the Q&A window found on the bottom right-hand part of your screen. We'll answer as many as we can in our allotted time. If there are questions we don't get to, we will respond the best we can via email. We'll also be sending out an email with the rebroadcast link after the event. It will also be posted on our DTN.com website. So, without further ado, Heather, I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Shannon. Good morning, everybody. I'm Heather Killow here with DTN. I'm happy to welcome you today. We're excited to be putting on this DTN Downstream Energy Forum. There is no denying that 2020 has been chock full of challenges. Together, we faced global pandemic, the most active hurricane season on record, and persistent economic uncertainty. Today, we've brought together a series of panelists, members from the industry, who are eager to share with you their insights and experiences and to help us all be more innovative and successful in our own businesses. Please join me in welcoming Terry Tesh. Terry heads up operations and is general manager at RB Stewart, a monument to managing fuel for high-volume retail of the highest caliber here in Texas. Terry also serves on the Texas Food and Fuel Board of Directors as a region manager. Director. Next, Jeff Rubin. Jeff also heads up operations, and he is the Director of Business Operations at Motiva Enterprises. Jeff has a deep background in fuel pricing, technology, and strategy. He moved to Motiva from Shell, where he managed pricing and strategy for North America. Also joining us today is Kevin Olsen. Kevin recently relocated to Appleton, Wisconsin after falling in love with the weather there. Sales and operations for a national distributor and marketer, U.S. Oil, which is a division of U.S. Venture. And Kevin also has a deep background in trading, wholesaling, and business development for transportation fuels. Finally, Jan Gordon, Vice President, Chief Commercial Officer for the Colonial Pipeline. Dan has held executive roles at refiners Delek, Racetrack, and Mapco Express. Guys, I'm really interested to hear what everybody has to say today. I'm excited to learn about your experiences, the challenges we've all faced in 2020, and how you are preparing and tuning for 2021. So let's get started. Terry, I'm going to have you start with our first question. I'd like to get some perspective from you on this one. Looking back over this memorable year, tell us what in your operation has changed this year. Did you make any adjustments as you and the enterprise dealt with COVID-19?
Did, Heather. Probably first and foremost, obviously, is cleanliness and trying to take care of the employee. From a transportation perspective, that becomes pretty challenging for us because we've got a pretty wide geographic footprint and don't always have brick and mortar domicile locations for our folks. So it puts some strain on our operations team to make sure that not only were we able to acquire sanitizing and wipes and that kind of stuff, but that we had it distributed and that it was readily available for the drivers. From an office perspective, a back office perspective, the biggest challenge was really getting everybody set up in the event we had to close the office to be able to work remotely. And that includes our mechanics, our dispatchers, our billing folks, AR, AP, all of those functions. And so everybody in our organization that is not a driver today has a laptop. We could close the office and continue to function just as we are. And then I think the biggest challenge we faced from an operational perspective was as we began to get people that might have been exposed and needed to quarantine and those kind of things, some of these longer-term absences that we're not used to dealing with, particularly how they impacted truck capacity. Early on, it wasn't that big a deal. There weren't that many loads to go around. But as our business has recovered and gotten closer to 2019 levels, those at times have been challenging for us.
Yeah, how could they not be? It's been very surprising to me, honestly, how quickly we returned to a level of, I would say, maybe 80% of effectiveness working remotely. And I think it's surprised all of us. It certainly has surprised me that, I was a person who got on a plane every week. And somehow, some way, we've been able to continue to keep business moving and kind of keep energy moving around transportation fuels as needed, especially distillate for the supply chain. It's really amazed me, actually, how quickly everybody fell into place and we were able to kind of get things moving again. Thank you. I appreciate that. Jeff, I'm going to go to you on a similar note. I know you've accepted an recently, but previously you've been responsible for placing the barrels that have come off of Motiva Port Arthur. And as we know, that's a very high volume refinery of 1 million barrels a day. I think it's over 600,000 transportation fuel barrels a day. So that's kind of a tall task. What would you share regarding the new challenges you face and kind of since March, different challenges that you believe you've had to overcome in the business, more from a refiner perspective? And I know there's a lot of marketing that goes on in your organization.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Heather. And really thank you for DTN and you, Heather, for arranging this industry roundtable. 2020 will be remembered as an unusual year, both professionally and personally for everyone. It's certainly nice to be here with you and the fellow panelists in participation today. So back to your question. The challenges we faced this year since March, one of the things we had to do is we had to adapt very quickly. Terry talked about everyone working from home and having laptops and things. We also had to, work from home and quickly assemble that everyone, work remotely. But our focus was really to protect our employees and keep the business moving forward, just like everyone else. I would say the most significant challenge is really the historic fuel demand destruction that we saw. If I go back to March, we saw volume for gasoline being down almost 50%. And diesel was down as well, that 10 to 15%. But the big difference was jet. People stopped flying around the country and, jet fuel was down 85%. And as a refinery, you have to either make jet or diesel. And so it changed the balance of, the supply and demand structure out there as a whole. The demand destruction was impactful, which negatively impacted our refining fuel margin because the demand and supply structure was changed. And it forced our refineries and other business operations to adapt. So in response, we looked for creative ways to drive incremental fuel gallons by shifting our marketing focus and emphasizing customer safety. Contactless payment options was a big focus for us as well, communicating to customers. Obviously, there was a lot less travel for our salespeople. Customers and wholesaler meetings were moved to virtual environments. One of the things that we did in marketing and sales was we launched a new centralized inside sales organization. This was to allow us to more effectively communicate and meet our customers' needs with fewer face-to-face customer interactions in a post-COVID environment. That's what we're planning to do. We had that on the plans, but we had to accelerate it in this type of environment. It goes back to adapting. I'll say there's a renewed emphasis on cost containment as a whole in our company. As we had to shift to more run and maintain focus, it's resulted in some organizational restructuring that you mentioned earlier, Heather, and really trying to design to better manage the challenges in the current market environment. Without a doubt, 2020 has been a good reminder of the extreme volatility in our industry, which is nothing new. We always go from highs to lows, and you can never get comfortable because it's always changing. I do believe that the industry, has adapted in the past to highs and lows and changes, and this is certainly another challenge for us going forward.
I just I just worked on a presentation. It was a real short one that we did at Sigma. And one of the things I did in that presentation was kind of a historical look back, right? And we looked at some things that were really far back. I had some people on my team helping me with the research. And we looked at the Great Depression, stock market crash of 1929, and then how long it took for the economy to recover. Energy was not as integral yet, right? Because we hadn't really formed the pads yet, and we weren't quite there yet. But so that was one thing we looked at. We looked at the oil shocks that took place in like the early 70s to mid to late 70s, and when fuel was embargoed in the United States, which there's probably a number of people in this audience that would not remember that. I do. I can remember going to the gas station, a little girl in the back seat, very hot car, and sitting in long, long lines, and you could only go based on I think it was the last digit of your license plate. You had to go on a certain day of the week. And then, we looked at like 2008 financial market crash, which I think a lot of us were on the road. I think there was a big conference going on when that happened. But the interesting thing about it, and I think what you're getting at, Jeff, is you made a lot of changes in the organization. I mean, you said you stood up an inside sales organization just to support the activities that your normal sales organization couldn't conquer because they can't get on planes. I think that's really clever. I know you said it's something you were planning on doing it anyway, and it kind of rushed it to the forefront. But definitely, I think, you look back at all these events, and we recovered quickly. One of the things that I found after 9/11, so 9/11 happened in September, there were certain aspects of the economy that had already recovered completely by the holidays of that year. And that's certainly the most catastrophic event I remember in my lifetime, and the largest terrorist attack on U.S. soil ever. And we managed to recover from that. So I definitely think the idea of resiliency and recovery is huge, and everybody making these tweaks to the business to adapt, I think is kind of part of who we are as an industry. That's pretty cool. Thank you for sharing that. That's cool. With, I guess, being infrastructure and things that are very critical to the delivery of fuel and to the economy of the United States, let's switch over and talk to you for a moment. Some might say that Colonial Pipeline is the stream that keeps the lights on for all of the eastern U.S. I'm sure that you yourself have thought about various concerns, permutations of the scenario we're in following COVID. What is your primary concern going into 2021? Given the potential, I think we're very excited there's a vaccine, a number of providers for vaccines that are getting ready to be released, and hopefully that's going to catapult us back into some normalcy by the end of Q1. But what say you about 2021? What are you feeling?
Yeah, thanks, Heather, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I would break down 2021 almost into two categories, call it the first 6 months and the last 6 months, in the sense that, in the immediate term, from certainly a Colonial perspective, we've seen some refinery closures, some that have directly impacted our system and others that haven't. So, we have some concerns, and we certainly don't want to see refineries closing, that feed our system. So that's something that we're looking at. And then, do we see another government shutdown? Is it with a new administration and a spike or surge in all these cases? Is there a desire for some pause button, even with a vaccine, to quote, slow things down, right? And what impact would that have? We saw some volatility and certainly earlier in the year and sort of spreads come in, but we'd like, you can appreciate and make sure that there's nothing we can necessarily do about it, but an appropriate market structure that benefits the shippers on our system and our customers, so that they want to ship and can have the opportunity to take advantage of the market structure. So, we'll be looking to see what plays out with that in 2021. And just, there's been obviously changes in customer behavior on our system, right? So Jeff talked a lot about jet customers, going from big shippers, as I'm sure you can appreciate, to perhaps some maybe shipping less, given the current environment. So changes in customer behavior. Then as you shift back into, the back end of 2021, and you start to say, all right, well, what is going to be a long-term systemic change to our system, and what is just going to sort of return to normal? And from a fuel perspective, there are some things that might turn out to be very positive, and other things that, again, from a fuel perspective might be negative, right? So on the positive side, we've seen a tremendous number of people moving out of cities into suburbs, buying homes. Is that just a temporary shift? And people being a little bit, more fearful of using public transportation and just driving more. So, is that temporary or is that long term? We've seen obviously people move to the south. I think that's a longer term trend that maybe just sped up a little bit as people sought a different course of action in terms of how to handle the pandemic or a response. On the negative side, from a fuels perspective, business travel. Jeff's talked about a fundamental shift in how they're going about interacting with customers, which sounds like perhaps less business travel. When will that come back, and to what extent? Working remote seems to be something that's going to take hold. It was a shift toward working remotely and a use of technology, and I think the pandemic just sped it up. So something that might have taken 5 to 10 years, happened for us in less than 6 months. So what are those sort of long-term impacts? And I think we'll start to get a sense of that at the end of 2021 as companies adapt and say, all right, here's our policy going forward, right? Here's what we're going to do. It's not in response to the pandemic. It's not in response to the current situation. This is just how we're going to do business. And we're going to see that toward the end of 2021. And I think that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that we've worked with companies. In fact, I was involved in a project right when I got to DTN where one of the large refiners needed to revise their business continuity plan. And we all know, right, one of the problems that you have with business continuity, we saw this when 9/11 happened, right? We couldn't communicate via cell phone. We have to have some backup in order to be able to create with our personnel, make sure they're safe, to get them deployed to areas where maybe they can continue to do their jobs and keep fuel moving. But yeah, one of the things that I think is really interesting for all of us is, in my opinion, some of the experiences I've had recently, I've sat in a lot of meetings where we talk about sustainability and governance and, environmental programs. I think that we are going to spend 2021 maybe setting those aside for a moment and taking a hard look at our business continuity plans to make sure that they cover scenarios like we've never experienced before. This has been, obviously it's unprecedented, of course. And so, yeah, I think things like that, looking at the business, very interesting in terms of programs we may need to revisit, new programs we need to put online so that switching our worker from remote and back is much easier. I think we've all talked a lot about office space, right? And my husband's company, for instance, they're in a multi-year lease in some office space that's over here in an office building off of one of the freeways, and they have determined they have no need to be in their office anymore, that everyone can work remotely. The only reason people were going there was to use the copier and to get free coffee. So, what will that do to traffic and to car usage? Will families decide they can have a household that only has one car because one parent is no longer commuting? I think these are all really big things. You talked about some of these are going to be temporary shifts. Which ones will be permanent? I think it's huge for us to be considering those and readying the business for that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, thank you. It's always interesting to get your perspective on anything, and certainly the perspective coming from the pipeline now, and I know you guys have expanded into some storage. It's very useful. Thank you. Kevin, I'm going to move over to you. And I was going to see if you would talk about, I've always known your company to be very forward-thinking in terms of analytics and dashboards, and depending on what your role is in the organization, you have a customized dashboard for your role. I'd like to get your perspective, because you are kind of, in my mind, a bit of a technologist. How do you see 2021 playing out? Are there Are there any changes that you anticipate making to the business? Did you make big changes to the business in 2020 based on kind of what you were looking at? Any other preparations, non-technology, that you are considering going into post-COVID 2021? Like my optimism.
First of all, ditto on the thanks for inviting me to the part of the forum here. We've really shifted this year after the 6 months of COVID hit. Our focus from systems, which Heather, I know you know that I like systems. I'm kind of geekish on that. And I really appreciate how the industry has been sharing and building better processes along the way. And we really focus now, our core focus to get us through this year and into next year is on our people. You know, I'll say, I think I'm speaking for everyone on here. We look at our people, our associates, our team as the most valuable asset we have. And this has been such a profound hit to the industry. I mean, we've lived through hurricanes and fires and pipeline disruptions and refinery outages. This is a long-going issue, and our people have to be safe. So we want to make sure that we're making sure that they have a safe environment. They've got the flexibility to take care of the new needs that they have with the schools being out and on and a whole new change of life. So that whole transition to the remote office and the productivity and effectiveness of that has put some of our moonshot ideas on some of the technology advances on the side, because we really have to right-size our systems to get us through the basic changes. There's so many changes going on right now. Believe you me, I'd love to be able to say, Alexia, balance my exchange in the Gulf Coast with Motiva, but we got to park that a little bit and work on, can I get into the Motiva portal? Can I get into Transport 4? I mean, imagine a day without being able to get into DTN to look at your allocations, your BOLs, your invoices, or to get onto Transport 4 and appropriately communicate with the pipeline. And then also make sure that you're not over your allocation with your suppliers. So our company deals with all of these different systems. So, you know, the people in the toolbox, the new toolbox that we have, we're taking out some of the fancy tools. You know, again, we don't need the Starship Enterprise. We need an F-150 to get done what we need to get done over the next year. But that toolbox, once we get into the other side, get transitioned, I agree with these guys, remote might be here to stay for a while. So we do have very good processes in place. So testing your processes, focusing on the tools that you need, the effective ones, you know, building a proper BI. We are very lucky that we've centralized our processes early on, but we have to challenge them. They're all changing. You know, how do we get in to manage our supply better and optimize our supply decisions every day? Very much going to be driven by remote access to systems like the roles of these companies. So we're very much focused on all of that. And I guess that's it for the system side going into 2021.
Okay, well, thank you. First of all, I want to assure you it will be through no fault of DTN that we descend into what would be Hades on a day that DTN was unavailable. So I'll do my very best for you, Kevin. You know, I thought what you said was really interesting. I like how you kept referring to it as a toolbox, right? So we have things that we've already developed that provide us with information about the business, analytics, tools that do things, right? Automatically set an allocation for you based on, you know, different parameters. You know, one of the things we have talked about internally, in fact, we've been meeting on it a lot, is in terms of data and in terms of analysis, right? And, you know, we're still going to have RFPs that come out next year, and people are still going to need fuel, and we're all still going to need to bid on those things. Do you have any perspective on how we'll deal with 2020 being such an anomaly? And so you won't be able to go back and have reasonable historicals and data for 2020. We're going to have to extrapolate. We're working on some modeling that we think is very smart. That what we've done is kind of take the same model that we use in weather, and in fact, weather can do predictive analysis based on historical events that have taken place. And so we're fiddling around with that a little bit to see if that becomes anything meaningful for us based on certain signals that happen. You know, where might people lift fuel if one of the major terminal cities on the Gulf Coast goes down. Where then does that push fuel? In our case, when Harvey happened, or maybe I think it pushed everybody up to Dallas and then ultimately further up to Oklahoma City. What do you think about there being so many holes in the analytics for 2020 and how we might be able to forecast in 2021?
Well, I think there's going to be continued supply chain compression. So the acquisitions are going on no matter what. Things have slowed down a little bit, but not really, because we're still seeing headline after headline. And that's purposeful. I think that's going to be a challenge as we go forward. But harnessing data is going to be, to me, one of the keys to success of any company that's listening in on how they manage their business going forward. There's a big need to look for ways to get better on predictive analysis, resetting your models, your economic models for your ARBs. It's a huge change right now. You almost have to throw out a lot of the past and just really focus on a lot of the data going forward. The ARBs are going to change. The refinery supply, balancing that supply and demand is going to be harder, but if you have the proper data in place, you can get in front of it. And I think some of the stuff that we've been talking about on the demand side, demand's always an implied calculation. How do you find out more about demand with the data that we have? Much like the weather, where's the next weather storm going to be? And what do I need to do in between a refiner, a pipeline, and a retailer, and a supplier to set myself on that supply chain to have the most success? And so I think that predictive data information is going to be very valuable, and also more valuable to the point that it can be on a dashboard where you can actually use it. So there's a lot of data out there, but finding a good tool to be able to capture it and use it, I think is going to be helpful for anyone.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Thanks for your perspective on that. I appreciate it. Yeah, probably more to talk about on that. Maybe we'll get into that with some of the questions later. Terry, I'm going to head back to you. You and I have had some conversations recently about the expansion that you're seeing in your business. In spite of COVID, I know that you guys had some plans to do some expansion into other states, and I haven't gotten the details with you on how all of that is going. But I guess I'd like to know, as a guy who really had a very aggressive growth roadmap for the business, and you have a lot of responsibility with just the stores that are in place and the logistics that it takes to keep those stores wet. I guess I'd like to know what lessons you would say 2020 has taught you, just in terms of trying to keep those plans in place.
Well, we've been pretty fortunate. Our ownership group has continued to be aggressive. They did not slow down any expansion plans. In fact, we just opened another new store 3 weeks ago tomorrow. We'll open 3 in the first quarter of 2021. So, we're blessed in that area. What did we learn? First thing we learned is there's no rule book. Kevin alluded to it earlier that, if it's a hurricane or a pipeline outage or a terminal disruption, we've all been through those things numerous times. We kind of have our plan in place. We know exactly what levers to pull and kind of what our backup strategy and philosophy is. There wasn't any of that with this, and it led me to focus back on our people. We were very fortunate, again, our ownership chose not to lay anyone off. We stayed fully staffed throughout the entire incident. In fact, we've continued to hire. But I saw in our people up to including our mid and upper level managers kind of an uncertainty, and I hate to use the term fear, but just this holy cow, what's next mentality, particularly early on, as it seemed like every news cycle brought a different doomsday scenario. And so for us, as a leadership group here, we started to really focus on trying to keep the employee focused, be responsive to needs, listen to their fears, talk about what did they need in their particular role. Should we have to go completely virtual? Should we have to, cut down what is our demand if it goes 50% of what 50% is, those kind of things. So I think that was important. The other thing I think we learned is, those of you that know me pretty well know that I have a big belief that I don't have customer-vendor relationships, I have business partnerships. And I really think that kind of mentality has served us well, not only as we've grown and expanded our geographic footprint, but through this 2020 situation, this pandemic, because it allowed us to be in a position with our suppliers, and not just our fuel suppliers, but our truck suppliers and our trailer builders and all our tire suppliers. What were the impacts going to be on the business, and have really open and honest conversations about what we were seeing. What did we think we were going to see? Because, I was getting phone calls every day from suppliers saying, so what do you think demand's going to be next week? And I'm like, your guess is as good as mine. But having those relationships to be able to be really open and honest with folks, and having multiple levels inside of organizations to talk to, and to get not only them wanting our perspective, but us getting their perspective on how was it going to impact the supply chain? How was it going to impact terminaling operations? One of the things we've not heard of, what would have happened if a major terminal in a major market would have had a COVID outbreak and they had to shut down the terminal? None of us have faced that. So that was another learning. And then I think the last one, and this is probably just business 101, but we really tried to just go back and focus on the blocking and tackling. Make sure that at a time when expenses were, or revenue was challenged based off the expense model we had, especially considering we weren't laying off people, we couldn't afford a big mistake. We couldn't afford an accident. We couldn't afford a cross drop. We couldn't afford those kinds of major operational hiccups that would have had severe, even more severe damage to the financials and to the P&L. And so we really began to focus at all levels of our organization of, let's not get out over our skis. Let's make sure that we're just taking this one day at a time, and we're focusing on the task at hand. When the next news cycle comes out and they throw us another curveball, we'll sit down, we'll talk about it, and we'll deal with that. So I think those were probably the three key learnings we got from this year.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff. I think that's really incredible. I like what you said about, dealing with your people's fears. I think I think everyone was fearful when this first was announced. How contagious is it going to be? Is it safe to be at work? What kind of interactions can we have and consider ourselves safe? I know one of the things we've dealt with in our own organization is helping people feel safe if they want to come back to the office. There's so many aspects of this that I think are very personal. And, we're going to sit here and we're going to have a forum, and we want to talk about how to keep business continuity and how to, help the business survive in spite of what we've been through and the demand destruction. But really, you're right. It does boil down so much to the people in our organizations, the people who are our customers. I love that you said people are not vendors, they're your business partners. It kind of reminds me a bit of 9/11 when you went out on the street and you said hello and held doors open for people that, you didn't know before. And I do think that that's an important part of this learning, right? It has brought us back to, maybe to use your phrase, the blocking and tackling of relationships, right? So anyway, I thought that was really great. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. So Jeff, I want to take you to a place, both Kevin mentioned this, Dan mentioned this. We're talking a little bit about how many of the changes that we're going to experience will be lasting. They will be permanent. We're going to be stuck with a new normal, right? And so what is your take on what that new normal looks like for our industry? And what do you think are the most significant changes, the things that will last, the things that could be permanent in terms of changing demand, changing consumer behavior, changing wholesale behavior? Talk to me a little bit about what you see on that list of permanent changes and how we might think about dealing with them.
Yeah, okay. Let me start with refining. And, you know, I talked before, the significant change in really fuel demand destruction going on. I really believe we probably saw the peak in 2019 in terms of demand. It'll come back, but will it ever get to the point that we were at in 2019? That'll be the question. You know, our industry, in particular the refineries, will need to continue to rationalize. We've already saw some announcements of refinery closures. I believe that will continue because you've got to balance, you know, that supply and demand kind of picture from a long-term perspective. Moving on to like the people side, we talked about this a little bit, Heather, the remote working. I think that'll continue, you know, even after the pandemic gets under control. There'll be some companies that will look at that and say, you know what, I can reduce my costs, and we've been able to work remotely, and they'll continue with that. I know our company looks at it and says there's value in having people in an office. We think we can collaborate better. We think we can, our culture happens faster and people get it when they're together and talking. And I went through, really this last year working remotely. It's a lot of work to get people aligned, get the messages out there. It's harder sometimes to work remotely than it is when you're in the office environment. So, companies will make those choices as time goes on. I think there's going to be an increase in emphasis on telemarketing and things like this, Zoom and Teams meetings where, we'll collaborate with customers and employees differently than we have in the past. We've gotten used to the tools. We know they're effective, and we'll utilize that in the future. So I think that's more of a permanent change I see. I would say don't be surprised that more offices and buildings require temporary checks when you go into them. I know our office, before every day when I come in, I have to go to an iPad and get my temperature checked. It checks to make sure I have a face mask on when I come in the building. And I get this nice little wristband every day that tells my colleagues I've gone through this process. It's again emphasizing that safety message to employees that people aren't coming to work sick, out there. So I think you'll see more companies, push for that going forward. Let me flip a little bit to what I call stations and terminals. What do we see long-term the effect on, those? I think there's going to be a focus on what I call touchless experiences going forward. The marketplace will adopt these practices out there. My example of that at the terminal was one where we changed our process and moved from really where we had a personal, our drivers did and contractors did a certification process. That was basically in person. We moved to an online certification. And I think all programs and processes will be looked at with a different lens going forward and say, how can you make them different, make them safer? And it's probably less personal contact, going forward when we look at things. I feel that'll be just a lens people will put on things when they look at processes and changes out there. The new things I keep seeing is things like home delivery and curbside pickup in the retail space out there, or the merchants. We moved very quickly into that, and in the convenience stores, some people are adopting that. I think the jury's still out on that, whether it'll stick or it's a passing fad. Certainly the grocery stores are embracing it, and it may make sense for them, but will it basically happen throughout our industry? I don't know at this point in time. I do see a future where there's an opportunity to move quicker into what I call cashier experiences. With COVID at convenience stores, I think there's an opportunity for things like the Amazon Go experience, where customers will use the app, they'll come into a convenience store, they'll pick up their merchandises, they'll leave. And through the use of, cameras, AI, and apps, it'll be a better experience for the consumer, less friction for them, less human contact. They'll get what they want and leave. And actually, when I think about the merchants out there, it's less payroll for them, and their employees are safer that are working there as well. So I think it's a more efficient process. I don't think that'll be something you will see tomorrow, but it'll be something where the future, the technology will be developed, and I see that potentially in our future.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, I think I've already experienced some surprises. I do some grocery shopping in a town that's pretty small when I'm not in Houston, and it has shocked me that they were one of the ones that said, we're going to go cashierless. And it's an environment where I would perceive they would need kind of that final check stop of a cashier ringing up people's stuff, but they've instituted a whole bunch of surveillance cameras. You go into basically a pod area where there are checkouts all along the perimeter. There is one proctor standing there, and you ring up all your own stuff. By the way, they don't give you bags. You bring your own bags. And you ring up all of your stuff, you take your receipt, and then you walk past the proctor, and if nobody says something in her little curly thing, then you get to leave the store. And, you've basically done the whole thing yourself. And so, it has surprised me. I know you said it's going to take a while, and I think it will for the types of retailers that want to have a more curated experience for the people who shop with them and that kind of thing. But, I'm with you. I think there could be some really big changes ahead, and they could happen, fairly quickly. Another thing that you talked about, and it reminded me, you were talking about the training that goes on, the certification training. And one of the things that we've really struggled with a lot within DTN, I don't know who in the audience is really aware of this, but we have an education division. And we have done on-site training and public trainings, and we've really converted the focus of that to be all on demand. And so now we're so hungry for who wants to do a training with us that we can record it and put some modules in it so that people can get training in a remote way, because people are sitting in an environment like I'm sitting in. And in your off time, you're not going to go run an errand or pick up something. You might sit at your desk and want to enrich your knowledge of downstream fuels and take a course. And so we really are focusing on that too, incidentally, and how can we help folks with onboarding training, right? So if you have somebody who comes into the organization as a new hire and doesn't know certain aspects of fuel supply downstream, can there be coursework they can complete that's just kind of off the shelf that'll at least give them the basics, some of the vernacular, and help them be operationally effective more quickly because they got access to this training and they weren't handicapped because they couldn't go to a classroom training, which would have been our historical onboarding process. So yeah, I think I agree with you. I think there's a lot of things. It's actually a lot of opportunity for us, right? It's forcing efficiencies, if you will.
Yep. Technology is helping us along the way here.
Well, Kevin, I'm going to kind of leave that same topic with you. I'd like to get your opinion on how you feel oil and gas companies what should they be doing to remain competitive in 2021? Give me your take on that.
Yeah, I would start out by saying I truly think everyone's got to look at their strategy that they had a year ago and really challenge it. I think that the status quo has to be completely challenged across the entire supply chain. It wasn't long ago. Look, it was almost 10 months ago. I was in our discussions about how demand behavior is shifting. People are urbanizing. They're moving into the cities, and that's going to have an impact in demand. Now, everyone's moving from the cities back out to the suburbs. So everything that we thought we knew 6 months back has to be triple checked. I think for these companies to be successful, they need to take their strategy and take it completely through the entire supply chain. Are they working on the right products in the right markets with the right offers? Jet fuels come up. That whole arena is going to be changing. How much of that demand is going to come back? How much are we going to see in the distillate pool? We're seeing, we're talking about demand drop, but most of that's gasoline. Distillates seem to be pretty relative. They seem to be staying in there, which kind of speaks to the logistical demand of rail and distribution to all these stores that are delivering stuff to your front door. So I think for them to be successful, they really have to find out where their power band is in that supply chain. they might be in a spot in the supply chain that doesn't make any sense anymore. Rationalization is one of them. Is there an asset that's in a part of the supply chain in a region that should be sold or shut down or expanded? So I think there's going to be a lot of challenge from that side. Outside of the COVID remote office management and stuff like that, you've got a lot of tertiary things going on. You've got a change in the rules and the regulations that are coming to us hand over fist, I think, on environmental regulations and the reporting. You're going to have to change their tax rules. We think in cents per gallon. What do you do when the electric vehicle is now tearing up the road? How do they pay their taxation? So I think you're going to see profound changes in the taxation for revenues from the state. I think you're going to see more consolidation. But I think for them to be successful, they can't be all answers to all. I like the block and tackle. Let's pick our spot in that supply chain. Let's do it well. And I think that's the way for them to succeed. And to get there, they're going to need all the analytics that you can throw to them, Heather, on the DTN side. So I think that's beneficial.
So get to work?
Yeah. I mean, it is amazing on the technology side that we're actually very advanced in many fashions in our businesses. Yet we still have guys that measure inventory with wood sticks with notches in it, right? And at the same time send their BOL in from their iPhone, right? So how do you get that gap closed and bring everything a little more into the future? So
yeah, I agree with you. I would tell you that the majority of the conversations I have with our external partners all have to do with, I want to get a piece of data from this system to this system. I want to integrate so that I can have a more integrated experience from the very beginning of supply side, of placing the order, all the way through dispatch, logistics, what temperature is the material at. You know, I need for the paperwork to be there before the drop arrives. I need them to not cross drop, because it would be impossible for that to happen. Yeah, there's so many pieces of it, and we do have so many of the building blocks, right? We have so many of the large systems that have facilitated the efficiency of a particular piece of what we need to do, like a tabs with allocations, or TIMS with inventory management. But, the idea is we have to make it integrated for each user experience, so that you're not having to have 3 different screens open when you're, trying to reconcile an invoice or something like that. So, yeah, I hear you loud and clear. I hear you. As soon as I get off this call, I'm going to go fix it all. So.
Okay.
Terry, I'm going to kick it to you. I saw you had a little bit of connectivity. Are you back?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, very good. So I've had the pleasure of working with you in the same company before, Terry, and I know you have a bird's eye view kind of into the whole integrated picture, right? You've worked for the refiner. You've worked in wholesaling fuel with me. You're managing, a logistics company now that really operates separately. And then, you've got to deal with high volume fuel needs. You've got to predict which locations are going to have X demand and keep those stations wet and negotiate with all the suppliers. What advice do you offer to companies like yours and companies like anybody's, right? What should the refiners be doing different? Large national wholesalers, storage companies, what would you advise? What take do you have as a person who not only has done it all, but you're now kind of a person that's exposed to them all on a daily basis as well?
All I can do there is talk about what we're trying to do internally. And for us, it kind of goes back to what the underlying theme of all this is. And it's how do we have tons of data coming at us, whether it's from an ATG, a driver's iPad, a refiner's portal, ELDs, all that kind of stuff. So it's really the integration of the data into usable formats. You and I have had conversations before about getting the industry to do more business in real time. By that, I mean, send me the BOL electronically before I leave the terminal gate. The minute my driver accepts it, let it be on his iPad. Send me the EFT notice right away. Let me reconcile against it. What we're trying to do inside our organization is use technology to manage an exploding transaction count. Every one of our drivers carries an iPad. It's how they receive their loads. It's how they do their electronic logging. So for us, it's all about technology and finding ways for technology to make us more and more efficient, and at the same time alert us to trends, both positive and negative, in our business that we need to begin to adjust. Changes in demand at a particular location. How do we get real-time communication from the supply community and the terminaling community about unexpected, unplanned terminal outages, changes in allocation structure, those kind of things. It all gets back to doing the business in real time so that we aren't going back and you get a driver under the rack and he finds out there's an allocation issue because allocation's been cut by 50%. Now he calls dispatch calls fuel buyer calls supplier, and that chain, and he's got to go to the back of the line by the time we get all that done. Makes the terminal inefficient, makes the truck inefficient, makes my dispatch team inefficient. So for us, it's technology, Heather. The other thing is, quite frankly, and to steal an old sports phrase, the best ability is availability. We need to be open to new ideas. We need to listen to our network, not just from customers, but from our supplier network. We need to be very focused on what best practices are throughout the entire industry and throughout the entire country, even if it's not in our business, to take ideas and put them to use in our business. If we're not doing that, we're going to fall so far behind the curve that we're not going to be able to compete effectively.
Interesting. I think that there's probably a lot of aspects of all of our world, right, where listening pays off. But I think your idea of, listening to in order to develop and grow best practices, right? And it's not necessarily that the person you're interacting with is going to tell you, well, hey, Terry, you know what? If you could send me an electronic EFT notification, that would be so much better because they may not give you that exact form of feedback. We all, I think, have to take it away and assimilate it and work with each other, collaborate, go to our different meetings where we have share groups and we can interact with our peers and our customers and really grow these ideas, right? It needs to be collaborative. And, we talked a little bit about this and I won't belabor it because I think we all know the hardships of working remotely, but we talked about the loss of collaboration. Jeff, I think you said this, where difference in having a team meeting and getting people integrated and involved in the topic of the meeting when they do have distractions in their own home office, or, there's a number of other things going on their desktop that if they were in a meeting room with you, they wouldn't be experiencing those distractions. And so I do think this is a big opportunity for all of us to listen and assimilate, right, is what we're hearing. Yeah, that's really good stuff. Thank you. Well, Dan, I'm going to switch to you. I think this is my final question for the panel. We'll open it up here in just a second. But Dan, I wanted to ask you, we talked a little bit about consolidation. We talked about demand destruction. What do you believe the unique opportunities are? So if we think about different areas of the supply chain, has COVID provided us with any environment that creates unique opportunities? Should we be investing in a certain area? And if so, what? What are your thoughts on the uniqueness of the situation and how we can create very effective but unique changes to the business?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to expand upon opportunities with its, has a symbiotic relationship and with challenges as well, right? So they can either be a challenge or an opportunity. I think for oil and gas, we've got two things coming to a head here. One is the pandemic and sort of, revisiting our existing business models, expanding upon what Kevin's saying and what those what's strategic to us, right? And how we're going to grow. Generally speaking, there's we all want to grow. Great, how are we going to go about it? So that's piece one. And then piece two is we've got a changing landscape, both in terms of administration, both in terms of how younger generations view our industry. And so depending on whether you're a public company or a private company might have different ramifications for both topics. But ESG, environmental, social, governance, and the environmental piece for us in our industry is pretty critical, right? And so as an industry, I don't think it's too confrontational to say that we haven't done a very good job of explaining the value proposition to the American public that we provide. We're not considered or viewed as necessarily in a positive light, right? And so I think there's a real opportunity and a challenge for us to change that as an industry. And you're seeing, right, through certain entities, announcements of carbon neutral by 2050, closures of plants, whether or not they have the wherewithal to keep those plants open. The announcements of several plants or refineries shifting to renewable diesel. Different states saying they're going to ban, use of ICE engines. So all opportunities as well as challenges for our industry to embrace. And then on the growth side, how do you grow in this environment? Well, I think M&A is going to continue to be more prevalent going forward, right? One, because companies are going to revisit what is it that they should be focused on, where is their strategic advantage, and do they need certain assets that they might have, right? And so, and part of it will be about focusing on where you can access capital and what's available, because right now energy companies don't have the same liquidity profile or access to capital, especially that they might have in the past, right? And so if you got to make decisions on where to deploy capital, you might want to divest of certain assets to deploy it elsewhere. So interesting times. So I think this leads to a better to build than buy scenario, right, in terms of where we are cycle-wise. And just for Colonial, as you mentioned, not too long ago, we closed on a transaction where we've entered into the refined product terminal space to extend our relationship with our customers. And, that's we bought 3 terminals, and obviously 3 terminals isn't going to move the needle for Colonial, so we want to continue to look at opportunities to expand that business and others, right? So I think 2021 and beyond is going to be interesting as we tackle the broader issues from an industry standpoint, and then companies focus more strategically on certain areas that are closer to their vest and may perhaps divest of things that just are less interesting to them.
Yeah, they're performing not as well. That's some really good advice, Dan. Thanks for weighing in on that. I think the comments about capital are interesting. I haven't thought about that in a while. That's interesting stuff. Thinking about where to invest and what's not working for you, right? I think sometimes it's really hard to make those kinds of decisions about the business and jettison things that are not performing. And it all takes you back to metrics too. I mean, how do you even decide what's not performing? You've got to have really good internal metrics on your assets and how they perform in your portfolio. So, that's really interesting stuff. Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate your perspective. In fact, I appreciate everybody's comments. I think, Shannon, I'm going to move us over to the questions section of the presentation. I think we have a few virtual audience questions that have come in. I see a couple here. Let me get started. I'm gonna give these to you guys, and then we can decide who wants to take one, or if you want to weigh in after somebody else goes. This one is, maybe this is for one of the wholesalers or Dan, since Colonial just purchased storage. Timely. What changes to storage could be initiated because of some of the events of COVID? During contango, we didn't have enough, but the underlying current is that we are oversupplied. What's your take on investment in this area, meaning storage?
Sure. So, I mean, some of the changes, right, will be to Terry and Jeff's point, just how do we make them more efficient? How do we make them more touchless and more customer friendly? Clearly, but on a bigger picture, I'd say it to some extent it's market dependent, right? So some markets are over tanked relative to others, and when you say we didn't have enough. We didn't have enough because I just wanted to make more money because the contango is so huge. So we had enough to run the system. We had enough to meet the needs of the demand. It's enough of what? So do I think new assets will get built? Sure, in key markets, right? Because there are still growth areas in the U.S., right? So, but largely. Similar to refining, we probably have an adequate amount of storage in many markets, but you'll see boutique opportunities pop up. I think the hard part is if you're going to get something built and something substantial, a lot of the companies that typically build these assets are looking for some sort of anchor tenant. Getting someone to sign up for a 5 or 10 year commitment in today's environment, pretty tough. It might be, not necessarily career enhancing to walk in your boss's office and say, I think we ought to sign up for this 10-year deal. It's going to be great. So the next big terminal to get built, particularly if it's, some large Gulf Coast asset or what have you, it's going to be tough.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
I will. Yeah, I agree with Dan. The location is very important, and also remember on carry plays you have to have a good exit plan. So it's got to be in an area where you can actually get rid of the stuff when you come out of that carry. And then also, I think waterborne assets might start showing more value for the import and export of ARBs that might move further off our coast. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, Heather, I was going to say, what you're talking about there are big investments, and this is a tough environment to make big investments in long-term strategic decisions. And so, companies have to see a return on investment. They have to see the vision or a future that the demand is going to be there when you put more storage in a particular area. And the world's changing so fast, but at the end of the day, economics will drive those decisions. And if there's an economic, opportunity, companies will make those changes. I think Dan talked a little bit about you never have enough storage at the time you want it, and so the world keeps evolving, and changes will happen. We also have areas of the country way too much storage, right? Yeah. It needs to be rationalized. This is an industry, and particularly these assets, you cannot quickly develop them because they're costly and they're for long-term investments.
And you've got to get permitted. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, thanks for that question, audience, and we'll move to the second one. Given the U.S. desire to become oil independent, do you have any views on increasing exports when we are in oversupply? Do you see this driving higher wholesaler and consumer prices? Is anybody interested in that one?
I can start with a little bit of that from the fuel buying side. We always, when we sit down with a refiner, we always hear the word about the alternative word. Here's the alternative for this barrel. I think it's really going to depend, again, to Jeff's point a little bit earlier about the rationalization. Where is that supply? What does that market look like? And to Kevin's point, what's the offtake look like? It's easy to say we're going to start exporting either refined product or just raw barrels, but do you have the infrastructure in place? And when you really give an honest assessment of that cost, is it truly a better alternative? So, our challenge has always been on the wholesale side is we have to compete with those alternatives. And the way we try to do that is we try to be rateable. We pay our bills, and we're blessed with having significant volume. When we go into a marketplace, even if it's a new marketplace, we've got enough volume that we get most of the supply community's attention. And I think rationalization is going to keep doing that. It's Darwinian a little bit. The weak are not going to survive. There's going to be more and more volume concentrated in less and less wholesale customers. And then we'll just have to see what the alternatives look like.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, Terry, I definitely say that's the world we're living in. We're seeing much more consolidation in the last 5 years than probably the previous 50 years in our industry out here. I go back to the highs and lows of our industry. Right now, fuel prices for consumers are pretty good. They're as low as I can ever remember, in my lifetime of driving. The prices are fairly low, and who thought we'd be here? But the world keeps changing, and we've got to adapt with it, and the industry will as well.
Okay. Anybody else? I'll move on. I think, I know we're a little bit over time. I think we could probably take a couple more questions. Let's see. For people who wanted to know whether this is recorded, yes, it is. Those details will be available to you after the presentation today. Let's see here. Picking up on Jeff's comments about building, maintaining team culture while working remotely, I'm curious if anyone has any tips, tricks that did help to foster that, despite working through screens versus face-to-face. Tips and tricks. Your pants.
I can take a quick stab. Yeah, our success, and look, we're still working our way through this, but there's a bit of Zoomitis out there. I mean, I actually think people do work harder. There is more distractions. You've seen all the funny commercials with the dogs and the kids and the people upside down in the Zoom meetings. And yeah, I think we're working all through that process. I think now it's more important to make sure that we're not having too many meetings and we're getting people burnt out too much, that we're having effective meetings. I think is the next phase. That's what we're trying to work on from our side.
We struggle with that, and I'll add to it that one of the things that has been successful at the outset for us is having that sort of regularly scheduled cadence and continuity. There were some groups within our company that had ad hoc meetings. I went to very regularly scheduled meetings, and sometimes I didn't quite frankly have a lot to talk about, and just opened up, you open up the floor, and that connectivity started to occur. So I think it would have been a lot more difficult for us to know what's going on and be on the same page and just have that sort of connected feeling if we didn't have continuous touch points throughout the week as opposed to just ad hoc meetings. So I think the trick is how you balance that connectivity, that continuity with not making people feel like, well, here we go again. Right?
Yeah. I'm
right there with you, Dan, in terms of that connectivity and that cadence of having those meetings. The other one for me is, we were pushing for people to basically turn on their video. There was a huge reluctance to start with of people turning on their video, and but it holds people accountable. They're present, they're focused, they're talking. You get to see if people really get what you're speaking about, or they don't understand it, if you can see their reactions in their face. So remote adds that, complexity of keeping people aligned. And that's one thing I think that helped us make sure that people are not only aligned, but that they're focused and they're present in the meeting, I'll say.
Great point.
I want to add to that real quickly. Mine are practical, but I will say this. I'm finding on our teams that 30 minutes is generally not enough for a meeting, and so we're not scheduling enough time, therefore we're late to every meeting. So my recommendation is to schedule your meetings for 45 minutes, and then if you give people time back, that's fantastic. And then the other thing I will say that I'm personally a bit of a stickler about is put the meeting agenda in the meeting request, so people can pre-read, they can prepare, and I don't have to spend the first 5 minutes of the meeting necessarily bringing people up to speed. We can have that interaction. We have time to, hey, how was your Thanksgiving, and socialize and reconnect personally instead of having to run through people not being prepared for showing up for the meeting. And I know those are very practical, and they're best practices that we should all know, but those are two things that I'm really going to focus on in 2021.
And Heather, one of the things we did internally, we asked our leadership group to reach out to their people outside of scheduled meetings. We struggle with this just from having drivers domiciled all across the country, and how do we implement a safety culture when a truck's 12 hours away? And so we try to just reach out and talk to those people outside of just a scheduled event, so that they understand we're here as a resource. Every one of our drivers has my email address and my cell phone number. And so we try to make it so that it's just like dropping by the office and asking a question kind of mentality. It's helped for us a little bit. To Jeff's comment about the video, having a face made for radio, I understand that.
Oh, cheers. Oh, okay, I've got one more, and it is, I'm going to share with you, it is from our friend Mark Lotweiler. Hello, Mark. Mark talks a little bit about increased demand destruction, or the fact that demand destruction will not totally go away. And so the question is, what do you guys see in terms of continued or increased consolidation trends at, I believe he's asking specifically about distributor and wholesaler level?
Well, I can say from our perspective, Heather, we think that one of the things the pandemic has brought to light is the quality of the operation of the C-store, particularly in cleanliness today. I don't believe personally that's a trend that we're going to see go away. I think the consumer is going to make even more of a demand. How long have we talked about in this business that if you'll just clean the bathrooms, things will get a lot better. Now it's becoming a consumer demand. It's a consumer expectation.
Yeah.
And while we can't necessarily slow or change the course of the demand destruction from outside factors like the increase of electrical and alternative fuels and those kind of things, I think what you'll see, what we're anticipating, is, again, the weaker will just not survive. They'll either become M&A targets, or they will just go away, and, again, demand will consolidate and fewer purchasers, but there'll be better and better operators. And maybe in a lot of ways the refiner community will like that better, because it's typically going to be the people that have access to capital, have the ability to grow, are going to pay their bills, and they understand the concept of rateability and not just being a spot buyer and trying to take advantage of it when the ARB's right.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I anticipate coming forward.
I ditto that. Hey, Mark, I wanted to shout out and say hi to you. But yeah, I think the retailers that have the best offering, consistent offering, cleanliness. Look, our country and our industry has phenomenal retail operators. One of them was just talking. And I think there is going to be some serious consolidation of those that aren't coming to the intersection with a strong offering. Heck, a lot of these primary C-stores and retailers don't even have to be on the intersection anymore because they're such a destination. So I think that safety, that cleanliness, that consistent offering is going to win. I think there's going to be more consolidation on that. But I also think, this is personally not our company, I believe that the electronic vehicles are going to have a material impact quicker than we think. They are starting to come to the market, and so people are accepting them a little more. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, consumers will vote with their wallet, and and the better operators, this will be an opportunity for them because they'll grow. There'll be additional consolidation, and the weaker ones will fall out as time goes on. I really do believe we've seen that over the last couple of years, and I think this, when you have a demand shift, the better operators will fight harder for it and will win in the marketplace, I believe.
Yeah. Someone mentioned Darwin earlier. I think you're right. So a couple of quick things. I want to take one more question. There are a number that have come in here in just the last few minutes from the participants that are still here. And we're not going to have time for all of those. So we will handle that by putting them in written form when you go to the landing page for the rebroadcast, I'll work with the participants on getting some answers to the additional ones that have come in. This last one I want to take is a little more, I think, global in nature. How do you think the political comments about oil companies, decision recently by California, they're going to really ramp up their no ICE vehicles by 2035. I think I have that statistic right. Some of the major headlines about fracking, that's a little bit aged, but I'm sure it'll be back on the forefront as we bring wells back online. Does anybody have any opinion on it specifically, how this would affect major oil refiners? Will further cutbacks happen because of this, not necessarily because of COVID?
I'll expand on that a little bit. So I think, again, it's an opportunity for our industry to be part of the solution, and so we can all agree. Everybody here wants a cleaner environment, and I think over the decades, our industry has made wonderful strides in addressing that. The trick, right, or the challenge is, are we going to find ourselves in a scenario where governments are making decisions irrelevant of the science, irrelevant of what consumers want, just because that is a trend or that's the momentum, right? Or are we going to be a part of that solution set, right? So if we're talking about consumers and we're talking about, on the retail side, let's talk about consumers on their demand for vehicles. The reality is 3/4 of the vehicles sold in the U.S. are cars, are trucks and SUVs. So while EVs maybe have all the headlines in terms of announcements, that's not across the country, statistically, what people actually want to buy. If that becomes something that's forced upon us, where we just simply don't have the choice, I think shame on our industry for not taking more of a leadership role in solving those issues that we as a society face. I think we can do more on that. But I think that's the question. Is it going to be government driven, or are we going to have the benefit of a competitive marketplace to solve some of these key solutions? What's the best way to do that? Is it certain tax structures? I don't know. It's outside of my pay grade for sure, but I think that's the key challenge.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else would like to weigh in?
I'll just make a comment that, I think as a consumer, the preference is let consumers make that as choice versus governments making the choices for you as we move into that, a different world here, I'll say, in terms of, whether it's electric vehicles and things. So if they're, in our past, if it's economical for consumers, if it's what they desire, let them make those choices as opposed to the government making it for consumers.
Yeah, no question. Kevin, were you going to weigh in?
As far as image and trends, there's no doubt that we've probably taken the first chair from Philip Morris in popularity as far as the things go. I do agree that I think everyone wants a cleaner environment. I think it's just a challenge of the timeline of when we're going to get there. I think that the renewables are here. I think the renewable diesel is real. It's going to be, one of those other things that people have to look at. And I think the regulatory side of that is going to be a challenge as we look at building in the taxation remedies and the reporting of that. So LCFS, imagine that in other states. The consumer is going to pay for that through, I believe, changes. So I think it's going to be here to stay, especially with the new administration coming in. So got to keep our eyes on it, that's for sure.
Yeah, Dan, I think your point was appropriate, and I know you've just been elected to the Fuels Institute board, and we do a lot of work there on determining, what are the areas that consumers really care about, and doing that kind of research and understanding, to use your point earlier, Jeff, consumers do vote with their wallet. And so, what do we need to be ahead of? What are the trends in terms of adoption of battery-operated vehicles? And how do we need to be changing our retail sites to accommodate those guys? But it is an education process, and I think it falls on all of us that participate in the downstream, from refining all the way down to retail, or maybe you're somebody who installs underground tanks. Everybody in this industry has a responsibility, I believe, to educate the consumer about our type of energy. And so, I applaud, Dan, you for starting that, and for everybody else for supporting it. I think it's very, very important that we make sure that the populace has the choice, right? So anyway, I think that was an awesome question to end on. I can't see who it came from, but thank you for providing that one. To my panelists and my friends today, thank you, each of you, on behalf of DTN, all of our participants today. Really appreciate you guys joining us. There will be instructions coming to you via email on how to access the rebroadcast, as well as additional information we will put out on that landing page. I just want to say I'm in awe of this industry and its resiliency. Everybody sharing today proves that we are on our way to a speedy recovery. Thank you, gentlemen. And with that, I will close. I wish everybody a happy 2020 holiday season and a prosperous new year.
Thank you, Heather.
Yep. Thank you
so much.